And I thought my ex was crazy. That's stupid. I don't know why I said that. You might say that Lizzie Halliday was somewhat of a girl boss. I wouldn't say that. I would say she's a serial killer since she killed at least 4 people, including one of her husbands and probably many more, but to each their own. Lizzie's crimes and murders were so heinous that at the time, newspapers were calling her the worst woman on earth. Like, imagine seeing that about yourself in the news. Also, a lot of people at the time thought that she was literally Jack the Ripper. She wasn't, but it was a theory. Now, I'm just going to say before we get started, it's really hard to put Lizzie's story together because there's so many different conflicting accounts. Like, everybody agrees on the events that happened, but nobody can build one consistent timeline. So I did my best to build a timeline that I think makes the most sense for me, which means it's probably wrong. Lizzie was born as Eliza McNally sometime around 1859. She was born in Ireland and her family immigrated to New York when she was between the ages of 3 and 8. She married her first husband, Charles Hopkins, in 1879 when she was around 15. Now, I did say first husband. She would go on to be married to at least 6 different men, and a lot of times those marriages overlapped with each other. She quickly developed a habit of marrying elderly men, especially men with military pensions, and then a couple years into their marriage, they would just mysteriously die. But because they were so elderly, people just weren't that suspicious. If anything, I feel like a lot of people looked at her and were like, huh, good for her, you go girl. Not much is known about Charles other than that his real name was Ketchbull Brown. So do with that what you will. They did have a son, but as far as I could find, he was institutionalized very early, and then you just can't really find any other information about him. So I hope he did well with himself. Charles eventually died 2 years into his marriage with Lizzie, and no one found it suspicious at all. She immediately married a man named Artemus Brewer, and he got a military pension, and he died a few months into their marriage, and no one found it suspicious at all. Later that same year, Lizzie married a man named Hiram Parkinson. And Hiram must have had the most convenient post-nut clarity of all time because a few months into their marriage, he fucked off. Immediately after, Lizzie married a man named George Smith. And George was really close friends with Artemis, her second husband. They'd actually served together in the military, so he was getting a pension. A few months into their marriage, Lizzie tries to poison him by putting arsenic in his tea, and it doesn't work. And so she just completely panics, steals all his stuff, and skips town. Which, I mean, same. The next time Lizzie appears, she shows up in Bellows Falls, Vermont. She marries a man by the name of Charles Plaistow, and either she just couldn't deal with him, or he wasn't worth killing, or something, because a few weeks later, she just straight up abandoned him. And I know that this poor man was probably so heartbroken and so confused, but imagine how validating that felt seeing the news years later. In 1888, Lizzie moves to Philadelphia, but she's going under the name Maggie Hopkins. She ends up staying with a family by the name of the McQuillans. Some people say that they knew her parents when they immigrated, but I couldn't really verify that. Now at this point, Lizzie had saved up money from 2 dead husbands and one husband who she just straight up robbed. And so she used that money to open a small store. And I guess she just got really bored with it eventually because she burned the store down and tried to collect the insurance money. She was found guilty of arson and spent 2 years in Eastern State Penitentiary. And also, this is going to be a pattern with Lizzie. Her and fire just go together. In 1889, Lizzie shows up in Burlingame, New York, and she's going under the name Lizzie Brown. She had one good fake name, and then she just got really lazy, I guess. She started working for a man by the name of Paul Halliday as a housekeeper. Lizzie immediately was attracted to Paul because he was a very good-looking man, very kind, had a big heart, knew how to treat people. I'm joking. She liked him because he was 70 years old, twice widowed, and he was a Civil War veteran, so he had a pension. No idea what side he fought on, but he was from New York, so we'll hope for the best. Paul proposed to Lizzie pretty quickly after she started working for him. A lot of people say that he only did it because he didn't have the money to pay her, and that's the same reason my wife married me. That doesn't make any sense, but I'm leaving it. Also, for those of you keeping count at home, this is now 4 men that Lizzie is married to at the same time. Surprisingly, Lizzie and Paul did not have a good marriage. Apparently, she was very manic. She would go through violent mood swings. Paul had 2 sons, one of whom was disabled, and that seemed to really bother her. They would fight very loudly, and she apparently threatened to kill him on multiple occasions, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. And I've seen a lot of people talking shit about Paul, saying, why would you stay in that? And one, that's victim blaming. I don't think playing couch quarterback and saying, this is what I would have said, or this is what I would have done, It's helpful for anybody. And two, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that a crazy Irish lady threatening to kill you all the time wouldn't be kinda hot. Eventually, I'm going to go to therapy. The next few months were so erratic and all over the place that historians are still trying to put it together, just like my sex life. Not too long into their marriage, Lizzie elopes with Paul's neighbor and steals a bunch of horses and runs away to New York City. I guess that guy also got really strong post-nut clarity because he abandoned her in the middle of the night. She was arrested and charged, but she was declared insane and sent to an asylum. Considering how not so great our mental health care is now, I can't imagine it was very great 150 years ago, and you can look it up. It was barbaric. But a couple months later, they reach out to Paul, and they're like, hey, Lizzie's good. We fixed her. She's healthy. You can take her home, please. Please take her home, please. And I think this experience actually had a really profound effect on Lizzie because she was kind, she was sweet, she was a productive member. I'm lying. That's a lie. In May of 1891, right after she's brought home from the asylum, Lizzie burns down Paul's mill, barn, and his house with his disabled son inside. Now, she says that she was in the house and Paul's son died trying to save her, but later investigation would show that he was in a room with a locked door. 3 months later, after the fires, Paul goes missing. The neighbors are immediately suspicious, and so they ask Lizzie about it, and Lizzie says that he is in another town doing masonry work. The neighbors don't believe her at all, and on September 4th, they, and I mean this with the highest compliment, decide to be nosy bitches, and they walk around what's left of Paul's property looking for any signs of where he could be. They find 2 weirdly placed stacks of hay, and under the hay they find the bodies of Sarah and Margaret McQuillan. If that name sounds familiar, it's because that's the family that Lizzie stayed with in Philadelphia. They had been shot and they were partially decomposed, but nobody knows why she killed them. Nobody knows why she went to find them and how she got them back. Some people say that she may have promised them work, but nobody knows, like, what happened to cause her to kill these 2 people. Either way, Lizzie's arrested and taken to jail. As the police are investigating the property, they get to what's left of the house and they smell something really terrible coming from the kitchen. They lift up the floorboards and surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, they find the body of Paul Halliday. He's also been shot and he was stuffed under the floorboards. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Lizzie just reached the end of her rope. I don't know why she didn't stick with the poisoning. I guess because it failed the one time. She was like, I guess this is better. When she was in jail, Lizzie acted the same way that my friend's cat acts whenever it has to go to the vet. She scratched people. She bit multiple officers. She tried to kill the sheriff's wife. She set herself on fire at one point. She tried to self-harm and she tried to hang herself. And eventually they just ended up chaining her to the floor. This story was huge for the media. Tons of reporters came in and tried to interview Lizzie. One reporter actually interviewed Lizzie and she told him about her other husbands. And that's the first any of them had ever heard of this. Like, the cops looked into it because of this interview and found the other 2 husbands who had died and thought, oh, well, maybe she did that too. Maybe there's a pattern. But even at that point, they were like, we can't necessarily say she did it, but come on. The police definitely played into the media narrative because the sheriff was the one who said that she was probably Jack the Ripper. And even though there was no evidence to support this, half the nation was just like, yeah, I bet she was Jack the Ripper. I think it's like how today everybody and their brother was the Zodiac Killer when we all know it was Ted Cruz. Lizzie was eventually found guilty and she was actually the first woman to ever be sentenced to the electric chair. Progress. But eventually she was declared insane again and she was sent to the Mattawan Hospital for the Criminally Insane where she spent the rest of her life. And while she was there, she was actually a model patient. She got along with the other patients, she got along with the orderlies. Everybody really liked her to the point that she got privileges that other patients didn't get, like access to scissors and knitting needles. Until 1906. She had become really attached to a nurse by the name of Nellie Wicks. Nellie told Lizzie that she was getting married and she was going to be leaving and getting a different job. Lizzie freaked the fuck out and grabbed her legs and begged her to stay, which is the same thing that I did when my last barber left. Nellie told her that she was definitely leaving. I don't know why she couldn't just lie to her. And Lizzie freaked out, threw her to the ground, and stabbed her over 200 times in the face and neck, killing her. and that was the last murder that Lizzie Halliday would ever commit. She died on June 18th, 1918 from kidney disease, and at that point she'd spent over half of her life in an asylum. There are a lot of things to say about Lizzie. First of all, I think it's kind of crazy that she's known as Lizzie Halliday. Like, I get it, that was technically her government name at the time, but that wasn't a real marriage, and she was married to the guy for like 3 years, and she killed him, and then she gets to be the one to carry on his name. Also, I've been really trying to think about Lizzie's logic. Like, you marry older men so that when they die, you can get their pension. And if she had just waited a couple of years, they probably would have died of natural causes, and then she could have got the money anyway. But she was very unwell, and I think there probably wasn't a lot of rationality going into her behavior. Is there a lesson here? Probably that we shouldn't get rid of no-fault divorce, because this is the kind of stuff that happens. I don't think it would have helped any of these guys particularly, but it's still a good thought. I just find it really interesting how obscured Lizzie has become. Like, out of all the serial killers that people know and can name, Lizzie Halliday is never one you hear, and people at the time thought she could have been Jack the Ripper, and now no one knows who she is. But at the same time, she did kill a bunch of people, so she probably isn't someone who should be idolized. So maybe just forget everything I've said during this whole video.